The galaxy shivered in the shadow of a power few could fathom, a darkness so vast that entire star systems quivered in silence. Legends whispered of a Sith Lord whose ambition eclipsed the light, and yet his reach extended farther than anyone dared imagine. In the dead of a cosmic storm, fires flared on distant planets, unseen fleets slid through nebulae, and the Force itself seemed to groan beneath the weight of impending doom. As stars flickered like the last gasps of dying candles, a lone figure moved through the chaos, his crimson blade slicing through shadows, his yellow eyes glinting with secrets that could unravel worlds. And somewhere, hidden amidst the chaos, hope waited, fragile as a newborn star, ready to ignite. The first whispers of the Sith's plan spread through the galaxy like wildfire, subtle but lethal. Systems once loyal to the Republic fell into shadow, without a sound, entire fleets disappearing into the void. The Force itself trembled as the dark side extended its reach, twisting hearts, bending minds, and turning allies against one another. But amid the fear, Alyra Ven sensed a tremor of light, a beacon guiding those brave enough to resist. The stars themselves seemed to pulse with a quiet rhythm, hinting that the galaxy's heart was not yet fully extinguished. Across the Outer Rim, entire worlds vanished from Republic records. Hidden Sith laboratories churned with experiments designed to control the very essence of life and death. Rumors spoke of weapons so horrifying they could snuff out entire solar systems in minutes. Yet, Captain Rin Tal and his ragged crew pressed on, navigating treacherous hyperspace lanes, determined to uncover the truth before darkness consumed everything. On Coruscant, whispers of corruption echoed through the Senate chambers. Senator Lyora Dax moved cautiously, each step measured, her every glance betraying a mind calculating resistance against forces stronger than any army. The cityscape outside shimmered under neon lights and constant rain, a reflection of the fragile balance between light and dark, hope and despair. Somewhere beyond the Outer Rim, a hidden enclave pulsed with quiet energy. Here, the first seeds of resistance took root, Jedi and rebels meeting in secret, preparing for a battle the galaxy had yet to imagine. Even as darkness stretched across the stars, these few brave souls ignited the first glimmers of hope, a promise that the Force still whispered of balance. The Sith's influence seeped deeper into the galaxy, subtle yet unstoppable. Entire governments bent under invisible chains, their leaders puppets dancing to the tune of fear. On distant planets, ordinary lives unraveled as whispers of treachery spread through marketplaces, starports, and schools alike. Even the most devoted citizens began to question the stability of the Republic, and doubt became a weapon as powerful as any lightsaber. Amid this creeping shadow, Alyra Ven meditated atop a cliff, feeling the tremors of imbalance, knowing that the fight was no longer just physical. It was woven into the very fabric of the Force. In the cold void of space, hidden Sith outposts churned with unholy energy. Massive superweapons, cloaked in dark nebulae, waited silently to unleash devastation. Engineers, bound by fear and promises of power, labored under unyielding supervision. Every calculated test, every silent deployment brought the galaxy closer to annihilation. Captain Rin Tal's reconnaissance ships darted through asteroid fields, narrowly avoiding detection, mapping the horrors before they could strike. The weight of inevitability pressed on them, yet determination burned brighter than ever. Back on Coruscant, Senator Lyora Dax's subtle defiance gained momentum. Secret transmissions between sympathetic senators carried coded warnings and strategies to resist the Sith's grip. Each conversation was a delicate dance, careful not to reveal intentions to the ever-watchful eyes of spies and informants. Within the Senate chambers, every step echoed like a heartbeat, a rhythm of tension where one misstep could mean ruin. Alyra Ven journeyed to a frozen moon where the Force hummed with ancient energy. Towering crystals jutted from ice plains, refracting faint starlight into a spectrum of colors. Here, she sought wisdom lost to centuries, training her mind to detect the faintest tremors of the dark side. As snow swirled and ice groaned beneath the weight of secrets buried deep, Elira understood the true scale of the Sith's menace. An ambition that reached, not just for control, but for the complete erasure of balance. Night fell across the galaxy, and shadows lengthened. Rebels gathered in secret enclaves, sharing intelligence, rehearsing strategies, and forging fragile alliances. Even as the Sith tightened their grasp, hope flickered in the hearts of those willing to resist. Captain Rin Tal scanned the stars, feeling the pull of courage mingled with fear. Somewhere far beyond the reach of immediate danger, the first threads of a counterattack began to weave. A plan delicate as glass, yet powerful enough to shatter darkness. Darth Malakar's shadow stretched across the galaxy, invisible, yet undeniable. Entire fleets vanished without a trace. Entire planets fell under his influence before any warning reached the Republic. The Sith Lord's mind was a labyrinth of strategy, each thought a trap, each plan a blade aimed at the heart of freedom. In the silent corridors of his volcanic fortress, he contemplated the galaxy as one might a chessboard, seeing every pawn, every knight, and every king. And as the first tendrils of fear crept into even the strongest hearts, a subtle tremor in the Force whispered of those daring to resist. In the dense jungles of a distant planet, Elira Ven trained in secret with a small group of Jedi survivors. Each movement was precise, deliberate, and mindful of the energy flowing through the Force. The air shimmered with tension, every rustle of leaves and distant animal call, amplified by alert senses. Here, amidst the shadows of ancient trees, she began weaving strategies that combined courage with cunning, light with patience, and hope with unbreakable resolve. Captain Rin Tal's reconnaissance team discovered a hidden Sith installation buried within a dying asteroid field. The structures glowed faintly red against the cold black of space, pulsing as if alive. Inside, mechanical horrors and experimental weapons whispered promises of unimaginable destruction. Each new corridor explored revealed secrets of the Sith's capacity for devastation, leaving the rebels trembling yet driven by a need to expose the darkness before it could strike. Meanwhile, Senator Lyora Dax risked exposure to send vital intelligence to the outer systems. Every word transmitted could mean her death. Yet her resolve remained unshaken. Through secret communications, allies prepared defensive strategies, building fragile networks of trust amidst chaos. Every message carried the weight of countless lives, a lifeline thrown to the storm of uncertainty. The first thread of organized resistance weaving its way across the galaxy. High above, in orbit around a shattered moon, the Sith unleashed a demonstration of power intended to terrify and dominate. Beams of crimson energy carved through rocky terrain, explosions sending fragments into space. Elira, Captain Rin, and the hidden rebels watched from afar, hearts pounding, realizing the stakes had grown unimaginably higher. It was a moment of sheer terror. Yet within that fear, courage began to harden. A quiet promise that light could not be extinguished so easily. The galaxy's heartbeat trembled under the Sith's relentless expansion. Systems once brimming with life now echoed with silence. The skies over countless planets choked with ash and smoke. Yet, in the midst of devastation, Elira Ven sensed a subtle shift in the Force, a whisper of hope moving like a current beneath the darkness. The light was fragile, almost imperceptible, but it pulsed insistently, guiding her and those willing to follow. The first steps toward resistance were being taken, quiet, invisible, yet determined. Captain Rin Tal led a daring infiltration of a heavily guarded Sith supply station. Shadows stretched long across the corridor as the rebels navigated traps and surveillance. Every creak of metal underfoot felt like a drumbeat of danger. Yet, Each careful step brought them closer to uncovering critical intelligence, a chance to strike at the very heart of the Sith's supply chains and weaken their grip across the stars. Senator Lyora Dax coordinated with hidden allies, each communication a delicate balance of urgency and secrecy. Plans were whispered, signals exchanged in code, and every choice carried the weight of countless lives. The galaxy's fragile hope relied on her courage, a single figure standing against a tide of darkness, threading together alliances that could tip the balance in the looming conflict. On a desolate volcanic moon, Darth Malachor observed the galaxy through the lens of his plans, unyielding and merciless. The heat of molten rivers illuminated the contours of his dark armor, his yellow eyes scanning hololithic maps of fleets and planetary defenses. Every calculated move was a step closer to total domination, yet even he could not sense the subtle currents of rebellion beginning to coalesce, small yet undeniable, like sparks igniting a long-dormant flame. As night fell across distant systems, secret rebel enclaves grew bolder. Small victories, whispers of courage, and clandestine sabotage rippled across the galaxy. The dark side had brought fear and destruction, yet within that very fear, the first seeds of hope were firmly planted. Even under shadow, the galaxy had not surrendered. The balance was fragile, but it persisted, ready to grow in the hands of those willing to fight. The plan unfolded like a whispered spell shared in a candlelit room. Ree's voice steadied the rebel strike team as their shuttle slipped from shadow into deeper shadow, a speck against the black lacquer of space. Ahead loomed the Sith data foundry, a lattice of iron and night where secrets were smelted and cooled. Elira closed her eyes and felt currents tug at her thoughts, warning of traps nested inside other traps. The force streamed through her like a river beneath winter ice, quiet yet unstoppable. Doors parted. Breaths slowed. Every step was a vow to the unnamed lost. Every heartbeat, a quiet drum guiding them forward. When the inner vault revealed its sleeping codes, something in the darkness stirred as if the foundry itself had learned to listen. Then the alarms learned to sing. The team moved as one, carrying hope like contraband in their chests, determined to leave with the truth still breathing. They escaped the foundry's throat and dove into an ice-bellied orbit where the stars rang like tiny bells. Elira sat alone in the shuttle's dark hold and opened the vault within herself. Visions poured through her, not as words but as textures and temperatures, a storm of futures rubbing like flint. She walked a corridor that had no walls and felt Malachor watching from the place between breaths. He offered certainty if she would unmake wonder. He offered victory if she would salt the earth of mercy. The pressure built until silence cracked, and she could hear the small child she once was, tracing constellations on a temple floor, promising to listen even when fear shouted. The force rose like dawn behind her eyes. She did not answer the darkness. She simply breathed until it could not find room to speak. When she opened her eyes, the path ahead felt narrow and true. Dawn bled along the rim of a gas giant as the rebels coasted toward the Sith shipyards. Towers of scaffolding clung to colossal hulls, like spider silk to sleeping beasts. The codes stolen from the foundry slid into place and doors unlatched with polite obedience. Rin's team threaded the arteries with packages of silence that would turn the shipyard's roar into a whisper. Elira listened for the twitch of the trap and found it in the rhythm of security drones breathing too perfectly. She lifted her hand and the pattern stuttered. For a moment, the world seemed to forget its instructions. Then the charges blossomed in careful sequence, not to kill but to unmake the tools of killing. One by one, dry docks sagged into useless beauty. The shipyard fell quiet, not broken, simply persuaded to remember its first vocation as metal, stone, and sky. The victory tasted of iron and rain. It drew the hunter. Upon a basalt plateau above a rust sea, An envoy of the Sith arrived with silence wrapped around his steps. He carried no banner and needed none. Elira felt the air change as if a thunderhead had crouched to listen. Words would shatter too easily. So she answered with attention, letting the quiet speak. The envoy smiled in a way that closed doors. He recited futures in which resistance was a candle in a hurricane. She let his storm pass through her like wind through threads, and found the unmoving riverbed beneath. When he ignited his red blade, she did not. The duel that followed had more listening than striking. Sparks stitched constellations between them, and each step wrote a letter in a language of restraint. When he faltered, she showed him a way to live that did not require winning. Night drew a blanket over the wounded shipyards and the newly quiet stars. In the hush after thunder, the rebels counted breaths instead of losses. Lyora's message arrived like rain on dry soil, a lattice of alliances ready to bloom. Rin laughed once, surprised by the sound of it. Elira walked the perimeter and felt the force stretch like a cat, waking from long sleep. There would be darker hours, and a tide still gathering, yet something essential had shifted. The galaxy had remembered its own name. Campfires burned low. Tools clicked into order. A child in a nearby settlement looked up and saw a sky with room enough for dreams. Elira closed her eyes beneath the slow wheel of constellations and let gratitude settle like warm sand. Tomorrow would ask, and they would answer softly and completely. For now the quiet held and did not let go. The warning came as a low tremor that did not touch the ground, yet rattled the bones of every living thing. Elira felt it before the instruments moaned, a pressure rising from the deep throat of space, as if a tide had learned to climb through starlight. Malakar had awakened something vast and intimate, a lattice of dark harmonics threaded through kyber veins buried beneath a dozen worlds. If it sang at full voice, it would teach suns to forget their own fire. Rin studied the stolen schematics until the lines stopped being metal and became intentions. Lyora's message mapped fragile paths between hesitant allies who had decided that fear was no longer an acceptable shelter. The plan was a braid of impossibly small actions, timed to a hush that had not yet arrived. Elira listened for that hush, the way a sailor tastes the air before a storm and knew the moment to move would feel like a held breath finally returning to its owner. They jumped into the dark between pulses where sensors blinked slower than human eyes. The Sith crucible floated ahead like a black bell waiting to be rung. Elira walked its corridors with her palm hovering an inch above stone, feeling the memory of pain stored in the walls, the way salt keeps oceans after the water is gone. Rin counted steps without meaning to, and heard his father's voice telling him to keep his shoulders low and his promises high. The rebels ghosted through red-lit galleries, planting reflectors that would bend the coming song back upon its throat. Elira felt Malakar's presence arrive as temperature rather than thought, a furnace stepping through a quiet house. She pictured rain falling through smoke and did not let the image go. The team reached the heart, a chamber of black glass humming like distant thunder, and every breath drew a constellation on the cold air. The crucible awoke to its own name. Soundless pressure flexed, and the floor seemed to settle into a deeper version of itself. Malakar stepped from a veil of shadow with the quiet of a door closing in another room. His presence thickened the air until breaths became decisions. He spoke of order that would not bruise, and of mercy that would not wander. Words arranged like polished stones across a river, meant to lead the obedient safely through. Elira let them pass by her ears and fall harmlessly to the floor. She answered with questions he could not store in a box. Who keeps the music when the instrument is broken? Who tends the light after the walls are sealed? Their blades found each other and wrote green against red. Sparks like fireflies learned new constellations. Rin saw that the resonant core swelled with every clash, and understood the duel was the drum that would wake the weapon if they did not retune the song. The crucible began to sing, not aloud but inside nerves and memory, where lullabies and warnings share the same chair. Panels lifted like eyelids in the Kyber lattice unfolded, each crystal a drop of frozen lightning eager to thaw. Lyora's voice arrived through the calm, like a warm hand finding another in the dark, guiding allied ships to anchor points around the station's rim. Rin triggered the reflectors in a slow clockwise prayer, and the weapon's first breath curved away from its target, like a horse deciding not to run. Alyra pressed against Malakar's rhythm until it lost the story it wanted to tell. He struck high to split her certainty and found only water. She stepped through the spray and drew a circle in the air with her blade, a quiet punctuation that gathered the chamber's chaos and offered it back as stillness. For a heartbeat, the song forgot its instructions. Malakar understood then that this would not be won by breaking but by outweighing the truth. He poured himself into the crucible's throat, and the chamber dimmed as if a cloud had passed through its own skin. Alyra felt the tilt, the heavy pull toward a future where quiet meant compliance, and stepped where she had always stepped, though she had not known it until now. She listened more than she moved. She allowed the Force to speak in the grammar of breath and balance. Then she set the mirrored network to that same grammar with a small turn of her wrist and a smaller turn of her heart. The returning wave gathered, not to punish, but to remind. It brushed Malakar with the memory of mornings before he learned to lock doors from the inside. His blade faltered. The lattice calmed. The station exhaled. Outside, Allied anchors held steady as dawn rolled across the desert world, below like a soft hand smoothing linen. Silence moved through the crucible like rain through ash, and the echoes of battle loosened their grip on the air. The weapon's voice dwindled to a quiet hum, no longer a prayer for ruin, but a lullaby for metal and light. Alyra stood still until her heartbeat sounded ordinary again, until the tremor left her hands, and the floor remembered it was only a floor. Malakar rose without reaching for rage, and found himself unarmed in a way no blade could describe. He looked past the wreckage of intention and saw the line he had followed for years, a straight road that had never asked where it was going. Rin's breath arrived in grateful waves. Lyora's message returned, softer, carrying words that meant bridges rather than barricades. Outside, ships held their distance with the careful respect of neighbors in a fragile truce. The Force felt wide, like a door that opens to a field with wind in the grass. They left the chamber with steps light enough to trust, corridors that had worn the smell of fear now exhaled clean, cool breath as systems cycled down from red to a gentle blue. Over the comm, Lyora spoke to commanders whose names had once been spoken only in shadows, her voice a thread guiding them through the maze toward the open air of agreement. Alyra walked beside Malakar without hurrying him, and he did not look away when her reflection met his in the glossy walls. Rin marked time by the steady tick of cooling conduits and felt a space inside him unclench. A room he had not visited since boyhood, filling with small, ordinary furniture. The crucible's great doors opened as if relieved, revealing a sky the color of untroubled water. The world below breathed with the unhurried confidence of dawn. Somewhere a bird sang where no one had taught it the word enemy. On the desert world's capital plain, turbines slowed until their spin became a whisper, and then a memory. People came out from shelters with the careful steps of those who still expect the ground to argue. Lyora stood before a cluster of transmitters and spoke simply. No victory speeches, no trumpet of debt, only the patient language of repair. She offered amnesty for those who would set their tools down, corridors of return for those who had been led away by fear, and quiet work for the tired hands of every city. Alyra listened and felt the Force answer with the rustle of small leaves. Malakar stood at the edge of the square and watched children reclaim a chalkboard with the gravity of artists who know beginnings are sacred. For the first time, he did not imagine erasing a horizon. He imagined a path that ended, not in conquest, but in rest. The armistice signed itself in ordinary acts. Engineers from opposite banners knelt shoulder to shoulder beneath the same console. Pilots traded stories that sounded like weather. In the shipyards once tuned for thunder, welders stitched hospitals from the carcasses of war. Elira walked the docks and blessed nothing with words, letting her quiet be the permission others needed to set down their weight. Rin sent teams outward, not to seize but to mend, mapping corridors for grain and medicine. Lyra drafted frameworks that looked less like laws and more like long tables. Malachar, unremarked and unarmed, helped lift a collapsed beam, while no one measured his strength against anything but the work itself. The Force felt less like a command and more like a garden, guiding hands to soil, eyes to horizon, hearts to rooms with open windows, and the sound of distant rain. Night arrived as a companion rather than a warning. Fires burned low and planet-side winds combed the tall grasses into soft waves. Elira climbed a quiet hill where the city's glow breathed like a sleeping animal. She thought of the corridor without walls and the question of who keeps the music. The answer felt simple now. Everyone. Together, in small rooms with open doors, where lullabies and repairs are the same song. Rin joined her with the silence of a friend who does not need to ask. Far below, Lyora's words traveled along new wires strung like constellations at shoulder height. Malachar stood apart beneath a lone tree, looking up without bargaining, as if the stars had stories he could hear without owning. The Force settled like a quilt across the world, weightless and warm. Sleep reached for the galaxy with clean hands, and for once, nothing pulled away.